Welcome to Safe Coalition, Confronting Our Crisis. I'm Dr. Ann Bergen, co-host of this series of programs which have been created by our other co-host, Mr. Jim Derrick, who also happens to be the president of the Safe Coalition, whose mission is to provide education, treatment options, coping mechanisms, and support for individuals and families who are suffering from this debilitating illness of substance abuse disorder. My interest is as an educator, really focused on early intervention and what we can do in schools, understanding that often there's a mental health component that goes along with, that underlies some of the substance use issues. And we know now that 1 out of every 5 young people is suffering from mental illness, and that 80% of those kids go untreated. The opioid epidemic has now been officially designated as a national emergency. More than 100 people die each day. And the White House Commission pointed out that when you look at it in comparison, it's as if we're having 9/11 incident every 3 weeks. As members of a community, actually as members of the human race, we have a choice. We can sit passively by and do nothing, or take action. Mr. Jim Derrick and all those involved in the Safe Coalition and our guests today have chosen the path of action, and we're so grateful to all of you. Jim?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. That's a wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being here. I'd like to start by kind of echoing what Ann said about doing something about this crisis. 2 of our guests here today are doing just that. We have Joe Wenkus and his wife Lynn. Joe and Lynn's son Jeffrey passed on February 5th of 2017 as a result of an ongoing struggle with substance use disorder. Lynn and Joe have bravely come forward to share Jeffrey's story and continue his legacy. And thank you, first of all, for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And we also have with us Cultivate Care Farms out in Bolton, Massachusetts. That's where you're housed. We have Andrew Lappin, who is the founder and director, and we also have Deb Madera, who is here, who is the clinical supervisor. Is that correct?
Clinical director.
Clinical director. Mm-hmm. Clinical director. And we'll talk to you more about what Cultivate Care Farms Incorporated is, what their mission is, their treatment modality, and we're going to talk to you about how that impacted the Wenkus family and why they're here with Cultivate Care Farms today. So, Joe and Lynn, can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Cultivate Care Farms and how Jeff got to get to Cultivate Care?
Our son Jeff had been struggling with substance use disorder for well over 10 years. We tried a modality of treatments within the state, Maine, New Hampshire, Florida. In any event, nothing seemed to work for us or for him. So ultimately, on a day that he did overdose in our house, we did send him to detox, and the typical path after detox is to find a bed in a place that takes insurance. Unfortunately, as we all know, the beds are very scarce, few and far between, and there's a great waiting list. So we opted to send him to Florida for treatment. He stayed there for several months, was not happy. The treatment models in Florida are very different than the treatment models up here in Massachusetts. Insurance was an issue. We did bring him back up here. We were lucky enough to find Cultivate Care Farms in Bolton, Massachusetts. They were, I want to say, at the time, alternative, inclusive structured living house. I don't want to say just a sober house. It was inclusive. So not only was Jeff there as a client suffering from substance use disorder or recovering from it, there were other clients there suffering with other types of mental health diagnoses or conditions. Their model is based on the Dutch model, using animals as therapy. And all I can say is that the minute my son walked in the door at that place, he found a home. He found a purpose. He found a home. And wonderful things happened in a short amount of time.
And you were sharing with me earlier, Joe, that was December 2nd that he found, and it was found his way to Cultivate Care Farms. And you said it was immediate, the change in Jeff and his personality. You had a wonderful Christmas that December 25th, 2016 with Jeff.
Yeah, we actually had Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Jeff came home and he sat on the couch and didn't want to go anywhere. He just wanted to sit on the couch and be in the middle with his family and talk with everybody and be there. And that's the first time in probably over 10 years that we had our old Jeff back. In other words, his personality came back out and Jeff was alive again and just wanted to be with his family. And we're just so grateful for that, to have that back. It all happened again December 2nd and came back out. You know, we go back, Lynn and I, we saw, as Lynn said, Jeff had been in and out and tried and was through the regular treatment and tried the 12 steps. But one thing when Jeff was younger, it's always Jeff and I shared fishing and hunting together. He loved going with my father and my uncles and all that. He had a love of the outdoors and animals. And we looked at this and we looked at Cultivate Care, and we was down in Florida. We looked at some other alternatives, and we felt that maybe some involvement with animals, a little bit different, this alternative might work for him. And I just remember dropping him off there at the farm at night, and about 2 hours later he called me and said, gee, I think I'm really going to like it here. And then the next day at work I got a call from him saying, I really do like it here. And then every day I would get a call at work with a different story or a different involvement with the animals. And we saw an immediate change and a growing difference in Jeff, and where he was becoming responsible and wanted to live again. And we saw that, and that Christmas for us was the best thing that ever happened to us, was having him back for Christmas. And Jeff made connections with, not only with us and his sisters, but all his relatives. He called down to Florida to my mother-in-law and Martha and talked to her. He talked to my brother-in-law Bruce and Laurie down in North Carolina because they had horses, and he told them all about the horses. He made connections with my sister down in Florida and started to build those relationships back up again. All those relationships and things he loved when he was younger, he started reconnecting again.
What a wonderful gift to be able. People that have substance use disorder and they're active, they tend to lose themselves to their drug and their mental illness, and they become something other than they were. And it's a very isolating disease. Isolating for them, it isolates families. We can talk a little bit about stigma and its role in treatment, or the lack thereof. But in there, your son is still there, and Cultivate Care and his stay there offered him the ability to come back to you again and come back home, if you will.
Can I just jump
please.
in on one quick question on that? I was just curious about, was there any trouble convincing him to go? Sometimes it's difficult to get people who have that disease to take the step to go. I was just curious if there was any trouble with that.
No, for him, because he was down in Florida, after he overdosed, we sent him to Florida and asked him for a 90-day commitment. And then we would readdress the issue after the 90 days, depending on how he was doing. He was doing okay. He missed being home. We missed having him at home. Insurance is very different down there. It was hard to get things covered down there, whereas up here, I kind of knew the loopholes and who to turn to if his insurance didn't cover something. I was blind down in Florida with the insurance and trying to navigate the system. So we both wanted Jeff back home, obviously. So when he wanted to come back home, we told him that home was not an option, that we couldn't have him back home at home while we were working, not involved in anything. So he agreed to further treatment, and the deal we made with him was, when we find you a place, you can come back to Massachusetts. So, we looked, we researched, we did that, we did this, and I remember when I called Jeff and said, okay, I think I have the perfect place for you. However, once you get there, I don't really think this is what I want to do, and I want to come back home. I said, because you can't come back home.
So you
at
made
this
that
time.
very clear.
Yes.
You made that very
home
clear.
Home is not an option at this time. So if you choose to come up to Massachusetts and you don't like the farm, you're going to have to find some other place to go. So that's how we left it. And to be honest with you, even though Joe and I had gone up to the farm and did like a sneak tour and everything, I was nervous about him coming home and saying, you know, because they do it all the time,
of course.
Right? Yeah. So I held my breath. I held my breath when he came home or to the farm, which was his home at that point, and really still is. I consider the farm his home. And he just loved it. And the two of us were just so thankful and so grateful. And it was an epiphany, and I was like, why don't other people think about this? This is awesome. Why don't we have more of these around?
But just the phone call with the joy in his voice to say, I'm happy here. I like, you know.
Yes.
Well, you know, back when, and Lynn brought it up, and I think a lot of us, you're going to hear this, will tell you the same thing. Jeff actually overdosed right up in his bedroom in our house. That happens with so many heroin addicts. It happens at home. And this happened just about a year ago. He 5 Narcans to revive him. It was just, we went through an ordeal where we actually thought we had lost him.
Yeah.
I think Jeff finally realized enough was enough, and that's when you brought up someone say, how did he feel about it? I think he really truly then is when he decided enough was enough, I'm going to try to recover. So I mean, I saw a change in him that last time. And that's why, so I think that also, and he realized now that this was probably, you know, his last chance, but it did make that connection to what was important to him, which was family and the connection with the animals, and that's, you know, that's what we saw, and, it worked.
Yeah, and I'd like to bring in Andrew and Deb now to talk a little bit about the Cultivate Care Farms model of therapy, which again is not a new model.
Not at all.
It's over 500 years old, and very, very fascinating. We spoke a bit before the show. First of all, Andrew, you founded this back in 2015. With a $6,000 loan from your grandma.
Yeah,
which I think is a great story.
So you know, I came into the field of mental health treatment. Previously, I was a professional fundraiser, and I wanted to get back to helping actual people. I was, you know, and I was working in a clinic. I was community mental health center, and I was just so tired of these same answers of we can't help them, or you know, if there's no program for that kind of person. Or, well, just keep doing therapy, see if they get better. And I thought maybe I'm just a bad therapist. I thought that was one answer. But then I noticed it was everyone. It was every clinic. It was every clinician. And it was sitting in a room and talking isn't working. It's a model developed over 100 years ago for educated, privileged white men that we're now saying everyone should do. Everyone should do this. And that model hasn't changed much. But it's the model that our medical system has adopted. And so...
And traditional therapy does work for some people.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And there's people that have had wonderful and amazing experiences in traditional therapy. Mm-hmm. I just wasn't seeing it in community mental health. Mm-hmm. And so I started doing my research, and I was just looking for a job. I wanted to work someplace that did better therapy than what I was doing. And so I ran across the Care Farm model, first out of the Netherlands, and then it's across all of Northern Europe into England and other parts of Europe. There's actually this wonderful place in Italy of 1,300 people in recovery running a farm. They live there for free in exchange for working on this farm. Just these wonderful, incredible programs. And I thought, well, I have a young family. I'm not about to move to the Netherlands, so I'll get a job here. And I found that there were inpatient places that were good, wonderful places if you had 6 months and $20,000 per month to go there. Mm-hmm. And for me, that would have never been accessible in my life. And so I thought that didn't sit right with me. So I opened up an outpatient center. I asked a friend who was also at that clinic with me. I said, come see this farm, what do you think? And she was about a couple months from getting her license, and we said, let's do it. So no playbook, no guidance. We said we have to do something, and so we jumped feet first. I had a friend who was gracious enough to let us use some of her space on her farm. She had this very successful, wonderful horseback riding business. And so we started there, and we learned really quickly that we need more space. This is actually really, really helpful and effective. But my grandmother, she gave me $6,000 to advertise. She was in business for many years. My grandparents ran the travel industry in California, where I'm from, and she said, I want you to try something, your own enterprise. So $6,000 went to NPR, and we did advertising. It bought us 10 seconds twice a day for a month.
That's incredible.
But it got us our first, some like 20 clients, and Deb, actually.
Right. So Deb, you actually heard them on NPR. You've
Yes.
been working
That's amazing.
for 17 years in the health.
At that point, I had been in the industry for about 15 years. I had just left a teaching position at an elementary school, K through 5, that had really kind of jaded me. I was seeing way too many kids and families falling through the cracks. I was seeing how this epidemic was starting to affect school children. And I was being told that that wasn't really any of our business. We just needed to get kids back to class. And I felt like I couldn't do that. I couldn't operate from my own ethics and perform that kind of work. So I left, and my husband and I had a conversation around, what do I do now? Because I'm not sure I can even stay in the industry. If it continues to be like this, I don't want to be a part of it. So we agreed I'd take a couple of months off, recover from the burnout, and see where I was at that point. And I just happened to be in the car driving somewhere, and I heard the NPR ad. So I went, that sounds pretty interesting. I went home, got on the computer, took a look at the website, reached out to Andrew. We met and spoke for about 3 hours, at which point...
No agenda. It was just
no agenda.
I'll meet the farm, yeah.
I was really interested in what you're doing. I'm kind of between things right now. I'd love to be able to come out and see what's going on. And he was like, sure. So after a 3-hour conversation where I said, I'm not really looking for a job, and he said, I don't really have a job to offer you. Later in the conversation, he's like, well, we do have that one clinician who's pre-licensed. She could use some supervision. How about an hour or two a month so you can supervise her until she's licensed? Perfect, exactly what I want at this point. I don't want to go back in full force. 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later.
It was Labor Day.
It was Labor Day. I was promoted to clinical director. So at that point, we had started getting even more referrals on an outpatient basis, and we had taken on a full-time day treatment client who had a schedule that was designed specifically for her issues, and she spent 6 to 8 hours on the farm every day in the company of either a clinician or one of the staff members. And that's really where we kind of fleshed out the whole model and how it could look as an outpatient kind of approach. And then we rapidly outgrew the space that we had in Acton.
Opening up, we had this, the research was pretty phenomenal to get this thing going, and we thought, is this real? The research, again, mostly out of Norway, and there's one lead researcher specifically, and there's kind of this landmark study that took 90 participants, and 30 of them were a control. They got an hour of psychotherapy a week, just kind of standard treatment. The other 60, they also experienced an hour of psychotherapy a week, but also up to 3 hours a week on a farm. Not a therapeutic farm, not with a clinician, just next to farmer, I don't know what the Dutch equivalent of Joe is, but Farmer Hans, and they were just working on the farm together, right? And so...
doing farm chores, farm tasks, things that helped the farm continue to function.
So at the end of the study, the reduction in symptoms between the two groups was actually pretty similar, but what was fascinating was 12 months and 18 months later, the farm group had a greater reduction in symptom and a higher return to functionality, meaning going back to school or work, than the group that just had therapy.
Fascinating.
So the conclusion that the researchers found was that being on a farm and part of a community where you have a purpose, where something relies on you, that you are building a resilience, and that you're building in a sense of purpose. These are things that are grossly lacking, I think, in our society in general when we spend so much time comparing on Facebook and on other social outlets of this one's better, that one's better. But on a farm, that's not the case.
And in terms of our approach to mental health and substance use disorder, we really seek to categorize, don't we? We want a diagnosis. For instance, dual diagnosis is often referred to. Well, I either need dual diagnosis, meaning mental health or substance use disorder, or I just need substance use disorder help or mental health help. Can you talk a little bit about your individualized approach to how mental health and substance use disorder are really seen as one and the same?
Yeah, well, right now you're speaking insurance terms. I don't even know if you realize that. Right? These are insurance terms that were created to categorize people for cost reasons, right? They had no consideration of the human in front of them and the ramifications of those decisions. So what we do is, obviously, we say we're trained pathologists, we understand diagnosis, right? But the difference is, if you were to go into a traditional treatment center and say you are diagnosed with depression, there's like a checklist of how we're going to treat you. You're going to see the psychiatrist, and medication's fine. You're going to do these skills, and this is what you can do, and you're going to be better. Go, right? And that's going to be the same for you as it is for Lynn, as it is for Joe, as anybody else that walks through the door. What we do is we say, welcome to the farm. Let's get to know your strengths. What are your abilities?
Your interests.
Your interests. Let's learn a little about your family, your friends, your whole social construct. Let's learn about your culture, your religion, your history. Let's learn about you as a person. And I also see that there's some mental health here too. We'll work on that as a person. So we're looking to build people, and we're looking to grow people. We're not looking just to take your diagnosis and pick it apart and tell you how to run your life.
And a lot of people that come to us have been in the system for a while, whether it's substance abuse or mental health system, and they feel really bad about themselves. And we give them the opportunity from session 1 to have a positive experience where they can feel good about doing something to help the farm function. We don't have any hired farm hands. All of the work is done by clinicians and their clients. We have some volunteers that come in and take on some extra duties, but each and every session involves some sort of chore or task. So that gives the client an opportunity to feel successful doing something. It also gives the clinician an opportunity to praise them for having done something to help. Thank you so much for doing that for me. That really helped. And this may be the only time they've heard that in months, sometimes years, that I'm actually capable of still doing things and being helpful to another person or animal or setting.
Because that's the part we forget a lot about is they feel awful about what they feel guilty about. They've hurt their families. They don't want to hurt anybody, but then they live with it, the guilt, and then they feel awful about themselves. So the fact that you're addressing that so aggressively, that's...
And it's the experiential model, so they actually feel like they helped something too. It's not me just telling them that.
It's not fake.
They really did help something.
Absolutely.
So they get to experience that. And those little sessions where we get to praise somebody for helping out, for doing something, for completing a task for us, those build up. And that as that builds up, the trust with the clinician builds up, and their ability to access some of that hurt and some of that discomfort that they probably haven't been able to address in other settings because they never felt safe enough to, or never felt the ego strength enough to. Suddenly they're willing to say, I remember when I did this, and I feel really bad about that. And the clinician, because we all have the mental health background, are able to support them through processing that, even if you happen to be shoveling horse poo at the time. And because the model allows itself, so it's a triangulated relationship, it's not me and you facing each other having this difficult, intense relationship. It's me and you doing this. It reduces anxiety. It allows people to share a lot more than they would in a more traditional setting. So by providing them little glimpses of their former selves, little glimpses of, I am a good person, I can do good things, I still am capable, and then reducing the anxiety of the situation itself really produces the results that are just so much faster than I ever saw in a traditional setting in my 15 years.
Can I just interject here? I know with Jeff, because he had been in and out of the traditional counseling setting so many times, they know what they're going to be asked. They know how to respond. And a lot of times, it's a game. They just, I mean, they say the same. It is. It's very rehearsed.
We call that treatment savvy.
Okay, so when you're on the farm, First of all, they have no idea what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen with the animals. You don't know how the client is feeling today. So there's nothing that they can rehearse. They just have to go with it. And I think that is the greatest thing since the telephone.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest challenges I have in training staff to this model, and it can be a challenge because, again, you have to kind of forget a lot of the things you've learned before, is you need to follow the client's lead. You cannot try to lead, you cannot probe, you cannot push. They are not there. You need to follow their lead. So you need to...
Very individualized treatment.
It's actually really hard
protocol.
for new clinicians. We got to train them to like stop talking.
Yes.
Interesting.
You very rarely hear me say, tell me more about why you're upset with your mother. Because that is a loaded question. And if somebody's already feeling bad, I'm not allowed to be upset with my mother. My mother's bending over backwards for me, trying to get me the help I need. I can't feel mad at mom. But if we're in a setting where we're using the animals, we're doing a task, and if somebody's complaining about shoveling, they can say, oh, this reminds me of when I was little and I had to do chores. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that.
Right.
So the animals create a metaphorical, was that right?
Yes.
Use of the word, Dr. Berg?
That's a good one. Good job. Yes.
They create a metaphorical opportunity for you to flush out some of these issues. One of the things I was fascinated about your model is and horses in general. I learned a lot. Cultivate Care Farms.org, is that the correct?
CultivateFarms.org.
CultivateFarms.org. I do want to repeat your address a couple of times, your web address. It's fascinating reading, wonderful place. But I learned that horses in the herd, they adopt their own, they have their own personalities.
Yes.
They're unique, and clients learn a lot about themselves by interacting with these very individual horses who are individuals like themselves.
Right.
Can you describe a little bit about that?
Yeah, so early on in our process, we decided to adopt the EGALA model, which is the Equine Assisted Growth and Learning Association. Now, they're based out of Utah, but they're an international organization that trains and certifies equine assisted therapists and equine specialists to work in therapeutic settings. So what does that mean? So typically in our relationship, Deb functions as the clinician, while I am clinically trained. When we work together, I work as an equine specialist. So we're going to come into the arena together with our client or with their family or with their partner, and we're going to let the horses be horses. They're not specially trained, right? We have 4 horses right now. Most of our animals are rescues, but they're just horses. And so we bring them in, and a very common first session might look like just get to know them.
And we also remove any of the halters or anything man-made on
These aren't
horses.
to be ridden. This is not
No,
a
we
ride.
These are
own
not riding
saddles.
horses. In fact, most of our rescue horses can't be ridden for whatever reason, whether they're older or they have joint issues or birth defects at this point. And we have one like that too. And we strip away everything that's human about the horse, any sort of lead line or halter, so that you can't go in and manipulate the horse the way you would if they had a lead line or a halter. So your engagement with them is very natural.
So, there's been, so I can say some anecdotally is, I was working with someone struggling with a behavioral addiction, and we came into the arena, and this was our previous property, and there's these 2 horses that I brought in, and one was this big, tall, beautiful black Percheron, if you know horses.
Her name was Beauty
For a
because she was
reason.
beautiful.
Gorgeous mane, everything. And then this little, he was a horse, but he looked like this donkey, almost like this mangy, feral creature.
Sure.
Right? So I bring him in, and these horses have no history of issues together.
They've lived in the herd together for years at that point.
And I said to this client, I want you just to get to know them. So a little bit of backup. That morning she had come in to say, I'm ready to end treatment, things are going great, I'm ready just to move on with my life. And we met as a team, we knew that wasn't really the case at that point. But that's not a productive conversation to say, you're wrong, stay in treatment. So we just went in the arena and I said, just meet the horses. She looked at me very incredulously. She goes up to the big, tall black one, and I'm standing far away. And she's just kind of petting, and I see she's talking. I don't know what she's saying. And then she goes over to the little one. She starts petting, and it's very calm. She steps back. these two horses lock eyes, and the little one just starts chasing this big one around the arena. So we're up against the rails. I'm nervous at this point.
Wow.
And she looks at me and she goes, "Is this my fault?" And I said, "What do you think?" And then the tears start. And I let it kind of play out. Meanwhile, this black horse cannot get away fast enough. She's kicking. The little one's trying to bite. The whole thing around and around and around. This client says to me, "That's my addiction still chasing me. I look like I have it together, this beautiful horse that looks like it's all there, but I can't kick this thing." Instantly, they stopped chasing and went back
Wow.
to grazing.
That is a incredibly powerful story. Deb, you mentioned to me you thought they were trick horses when you first went.
I did the first couple of times.
These types of stories.
I had zero horse experience
Right.
prior to starting here. So I have had an incredible learning curve through all of this. And the first couple of times I watched it, I was like, they have those horses trained. And then I actually volunteered to be the client to experience it from that side. And my mind was completely blown because the horses are they're a blank slate, but they're incredibly intuitive. They have a sense of smell that is
Like 40 times better than a dog.
so they're smelling hormone changes and pheromones and things that we can't detect as humans. They also, recent research has also shown that they have the ability to read human facial expressions, which is relatively new research, but totally makes sense if you've ever worked with these horses. So between those things, they really sense what the clients need and act in a way that is helpful for the clients. I've brought in clients who are absolutely terrified of the horses, and the horses pretty much know to stay away until that person develops some comfort, and then they'll approach. I've had other people that just want to be all over these horses, and maybe they have some issues around safety or personal space, and the horses will be like, "No, you're not going to get all over me. Get away from me." And then the question is, can we talk about what just happened? Well, yeah, the horse kept walking away from me. What do you think that is? And it's not me saying, well, yeah, because you are all over them, which isn't helpful and doesn't get me anywhere. It's, oh, that horse doesn't like me.
That's so interesting. Is they see it as a rejection, and then you have to really talk about
And
that.
then that opens the door to,
Yes.
let's talk a little bit more
Yeah.
about that. And that is really where the horses are most powerful.
Wow, wow, that's pretty
Isn't that
incredible.
amazing?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And people forget these horses, they're big and they're powerful. They're prey animals.
Yeah.
Like horses in the wild, they're in herds, they are prey. They're constantly on alert. They're looking around. Like they have to feel safe and comfortable in their setting to engage. So if you approach with all that anxiety and fear, they feel that.
So Jeff had a horse, Bubba, and Bubba was his pal.
Yep.
Jeff took to Bubba right away. I met Bubba at Jeff's service. Beautiful animal. Can you describe what Jeff's interactions with Bubba were and the impact
Well,
on Jeff?
I'll tell you, what we're just talking about, Jeff, after all those years, all right, felt very, very low self-esteem being a drug addict, all right, didn't feel he had anything to offer, okay, didn't feel anyone loved him anymore, all right, felt very rejected. And he got to meet Bubba, and all of a sudden Bubba needed all this care, okay, and especially when Bubba had his tooth pulled, all right. Jeff took to Bubba, Bubba took to Jeff, all right, and all of a sudden Jeff felt wanted, loved, and that horse needed care. And there was 2 days that Jeff came home for Christmas Eve and Christmas. Jeff said at 3, he started, what time is it? Why, Jeff? I'm going, oh my God, we're going to go back to the old days again. I want to get back to the farm to take care of the horses.
And he
They
had
need
the
me.
days off.
Yeah.
He was granted permission
Yeah.
to stay home for the
So
entire day.
It gave him that sense again that he was loved and needed.
Yeah.
And it was, even though he knew we did, all right, but we couldn't help him, all right?
Sure.
But that horse needed to be cared for.
And it's unconditional. I mean, not
Right.
that. I mean, I can say I love my children unconditionally. However, when you're dealing with substance use disorder, you know sometimes you got to put that wall up to survive,
Sure.
and you have to go.
And he was very aware of the fact that he had hurt you both.
Yeah.
So
And
there was some guardedness
Yeah,
around
there
that.
was very guardedness around
Bubba didn't
that.
have that.
Right, exactly. So he was free to be himself without any prejudgment or, conditions. And he took to the horse. Bubba took to him. Jeff
They
took to
kind of look
Bubba.
like each other too.
They had the red beard. Jeff
Yeah,
had
the red beard and everything.
There's a
yeah.
wonderful picture of Jeff with Bubba that you
Yeah.
have. I think it's on your Facebook
Yeah.
page, and I've seen it before of Jeff with his face right up
Yeah.
against
The
Bubba.
Bubba
And Jeff
selfie.
Yeah.
it's a wonderful
Yeah.
picture of Jeff and Bubba.
It's just amazing the I don't know the strength. I'm not sure what the right word is, but the power of the animals are just. I can't describe
And you
it.
mean that both physically and emotionally?
Yes,
and
yes. And I do have to say also, with Cultivate Care Farms, with all of the other treatment centers that Jeff went to, and we would religiously go visit him on Sunday if they allowed or whatever, Cultivate Care Farms was the only one that called us and said, okay, so when are you coming in to talk with us? Okay, we're going to have a family meeting. Can you come in? Can this day work? Can this day work? Usually, with the other modalities, they'll, you have to show your license, who you are. You can't have your cell phones. You can't do this. You can't do that. And then really, it's just a visit between you and your child. At Cultivate Care Farms, Andrew and Deb. I could call Andrew for anything, and it wasn't. Well, and I don't know if Jeff ever signed a HIPAA
course he
release.
did.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's a requirement for treatment. Yeah.
Well, because other places, that's I cannot confirm or deny or blah blah blah
Yeah.
blah 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 blah.
you
blah.
actually, you probably can't even find out whether or not your son or daughter is still at the,
Right.
at the
Correct.
program once they've attained
Correct.
the age of
But-
18
But that was one of the things
without our
that
consent.
our particular program said.
Yeah.
We want to have releases to your
Yes.
family.
So
we
that
need
was
to
part of the
involve.
requirement
Yes.
coming in.
Right, because you're
Yes.
part of a system. We
Right.
can't heal you if we can't help you heal your system.
Right.
And lots of times parents need education that they haven't received yet.
Sure.
I was shocked and a little horrified when we did have our meeting.
Dumbfounded.
And you guys reported to us, this is the first time anybody's ever sat us down and said, he's done drugs a long time. He's overdosed several times. He's got some brain damage at this point.
Yeah.
His brain is
Yeah.
not functional
Yeah.
the way it used
Yeah.
to. And nobody had ever bothered to really share that with them.
And that sets a lot of families up for failure. It gives you this false expectations of, well, now that my child is no longer using substances, they must be like the person they were 10 years
Right.
ago. And that's just not the
Sure.
reality.
That's-
Sure.
But no one explains that. And I was flabbergasted to know that you'd been to so many treatment centers
Yeah.
and no one
No one
I
had
have-
taken the time.
No, I have to tell you, that was what Oprah would call a light bulb moment for me, because I had never realized the amount of damage that the opiates and
Yeah.
drugs can do to the brain. So when when I would be speaking to him, and he either wouldn't remember
Yep.
or, pay attention.
he had some executive functioning
did.
issues.
But, that never occurred to me.
Right.
So in my mind, I'm saying, okay, he's using again. He's not paying attention to me. How many times do I have to tell you? Not
Yeah.
realizing that he was doing the best he could at the time.
Right.
And that's when I had that light bulb moment, and it was like, oh, now it makes sense.
So
And
how many families out there have this unrealistic expectation?
Nine out of 10?
I would think a lot of them
If
do.
not
So
nine.
many.
If not more than that, if 10 out of 10?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention to you that Cultivate Care Farms actually has some really exciting news. They recently were approved, I believe, by Blue Cross Blue Shield.
So we're waiting for the final approval, but we are anticipating in the next couple of weeks to be able to start accepting Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance. We've also have applications in with Tufts, and we're looking at pursuing other
And the
insurance
reason
panels
I
as
bring
well.
that up is that so many of the therapies today, yoga, meditation, all of which have long thousands of years of empirical evidence that show that they work, are considered alternative therapies and usually outside of the insurance system. And here's one that up until now has been alternative, but is clearly
It's been
being
a
accepted.
two-year battle
I understand.
to get to this
But
point.
the fact that you're even winning it is monumental.
That's
Yeah.
huge. That's huge. But I was going to ask you, just looking back at your experience in the public schools and teaching, and certainly now there's more of an emphasis on social emotional, but when you look back at that experience, what would you want to see different, knowing what you know now from where you are, and saying when we look at maybe what we could do a lot earlier before kids hit or young people hit this, what can we be what from your experience, you lived it, you were there and you saw it, what would you say, advice or suggestions?
The stigma needs to go away. A lot of these families are suffering in silence. A lot of these kids have a parent who's actively using or in recovery.
And those kids are sitting in our classes.
And they're sitting in our classroom.
Raised by a grandparent.
Right.
And they're struggling, and they are too ashamed to ask for help or seek out help. But, they're not paying attention. They're not turning in their homework. They're not taking care of some of the basic things. They show up to school with no lunch. And rather than the school being responsive in a positive manner that actually supports the child becomes a discipline issue. And I think we're just setting up a whole other generation for failure.
And the state, I think, perpetuates that.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Every child on state insurance has to fill out this very lengthy, every 90 days, this very lengthy questionnaire. And I remember being in a clinic, and half of the questions were about social and emotional things that essentially you answer the question, they go, well, we can't treat that with this insurance. We're not allowed to even talk about this. So it's like we checked the boxes, so we're okay, right? But there's no follow-through.
Interesting. You cultivate Care Farms, and before I get on to that, I just want to say that you mentioned stigma, and Joe and Lynn and the courage that they have to come forward, and Jeff's legacy is helping combat that stigma. What has that experience been like for you?
Well, first of all, I would have to say, as you know, being a parent or dealing with substance use disorder in the family is very isolating because of the stigma, because of the uncertainty of the family dynamics when other people are at your house or you're entertaining. So you tend to shut people out because you can control it better when it's just you. So I do have to say that we were pretty open about Jeff's struggle within the last couple of years. However, since he has passed, and it's very important for us to make sure that Jeff's death is not just a statistic. This is his legacy. We love it. Jeff loved it. I want to give this opportunity to anybody who wants to try it. It's that important, and it works.
Right.
So it gives me comfort. I know Jeff would be very proud because it's something that he loved, and I'm very excited to be part of it. I mean, you have to go up to the farm and experience to get that feeling that I have when I talk about it. First of all, the theory behind it is awesome. Deb and Andrew are awesome. Jeff considered them their family. I do consider them my family as well. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have had our son back for those couple of months.
Can you speak, because the awful part, one of the awful parts of this disease is the relapse that sometimes happens, and that when things look promising, and then, but so ultimately, he did relapse.
Yes, he did.
Can you explain that process a little bit about what happened, or is that too personal to share? Or
well, you know what happened? I can't say for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can. However, now that I am where I am, and we've talked about the damage of the drugs and the overdosing, and I will say Jeff overdosed many, many times. We used to say he's a cat with 9 lives. I mean, more than I think we know, he overdosed. Therefore, he did have a lot of brain damage, and he had some disabilities to begin with before he started the drug usage. So, I think as a parent of an addict, even when they're in recovery, you're always on edge, because you know the shoe can drop. I mean, it can change at any moment. I have friends whose children are in recovery for 3-5 years, and they say, by the grace of God, I'm not you today, but I could be tomorrow. So,
it's a long journey.
It's a long journey, but what happens is, because in the beginning your emotions are way down, and then when they're in recovery, you go way up, and then when they relapse, you go down even lower,
Right.
and then you come up here. So I think what happens is, as a protective mechanism, you kind of just stay like this and know that it could happen. I was shocked because he was doing so well, but I also know he struggled every day, and I think you'll agree with me.
Yeah.
And he wanted to get sober.
Yeah.
He really, really did, but
He did. You know, when he was
Yeah.
7 months, about 7 months clean, in that first year is really difficult. We know, you know, talk with a lot of other people. It's not uncommon to have, you know, for
Right.
that to have
Yeah.
them to. And the problem now is that now instead of being just plain old
Yeah,
heroin
it's
now,
fentanyl
now
and
it's
fentanyl and everything
fentanyl,
else, yeah.
and it's lethal now.
And
So
a
they
lot
do
of this
happen.
does come back to this stigma, right? Of this doesn't happen in this town, so there isn't the proactive work on the many stakeholders that need to play
You are
into
so right,
keeping it
yeah.
off the streets,
So
and keeping it
right.
out of access.
Right.
plus too, in the communities, at least the communities that I'm familiar with, so you have a child suffering and you're doing everything you can, and you allow him to come home, and you know, what support system other than their parents do they have? There isn't any. I mean, Joe and I would take turns going to work, taking vacation to stay home with him, because there wasn't any place for him to go during the day that was good for him, constructive, keep him busy, give him a sense of purpose, you know?
Because the addiction just doesn't end with going to rehab, or
Right.
first of all detox, then rehab for 3. That's what we got. Oh, you can go to this, and this, and then all of a sudden you back out. Well,
Now
no,
what?
The
now,
treatment cliff.
Yeah. Now what?
And now what is now? That's where Cultivate Care Farms comes in and says, "Wait a minute now. Okay, now you're clean now, and we've got you relatively healthy, but now you have to learn about yourself, so you don't do it over
And the
and over
coping
again."
mechanisms and the
Yep.
self-worth and stuff
Can
like that.
Can I just one more?
Sure.
Just because if money, now this is a national emergency, finally declared that, and promises of money pouring in, what would be the best use of, let's say hypothetically, all this money is going to pour into the, you know, through. What do we need to do with that money? It seems, I mean, you've identified a whole bunch of things that have to, especially supports for families, and I was just curious as to.
It's that cliff.
It's the treatment
So
cliff.
there are wonderful detox. We understand how to detox someone. We know
Yep.
how to get someone to get substances out of their system. That's done. We understand that. We understand how to do a 21-day rehab. We understand that. What we don't do well is the next step.
Yeah,
right.
long term.
It's the long term.
Step down
Insurance
long
doesn't
term.
cover
Yeah.
sober housing.
No.
No insurance in this country will cover a sober house. And so you have two options in sober housing. You can go pay $150 a week at a flop house, usually.
But the
or-
drug dealers are standing right outside the front door to
Right.
provide
So
for you
no,
again.
so they're not covered by insurance.
No,
Nope.
no,
Or you can pay
no.
tons and tons of money for very expensive high-end sober houses.
And there are good sober homes.
Yes,
in-
there are.
Absolutely.
in
But,
certain
yeah.
standards, but I
no
think you're.
monitoring of them.
I think you're. That's right. Not nationally. On
Even-
the state, we have MASH.
MASH, right.
Which, if
but-
you look at the MASH certification standards, most single-family homes would meet that standard.
That's right. So we're not even, we're way behind the curve with
Correct.
this and with all the facilities out there. And your point for emphasis is absolutely spot on in my experience. So what you're basically saying is, you know, if I'm a 25 to 32-year-old person who's just entering long-term recovery, say a year, 2 years sober, you know, you've got very little options in terms of reintegrating yourself with the basic skills that you've lost while you were active, and with finding, how about social, just socializing in a
Yes.
sober
Right.
environment,
Yep.
and learning how to do basic functions in terms of socializing.
It's
so
huge,
It's we're really, there's a vacuum there that's almost
There is a
seemingly
big
insurmountable at
vacuum.
times. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Cultivate Care Farms as it exists today, and the Wankus family are not only thrilled to have had their son Jeffrey with you for that time, but you're now on the board of directors. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you're looking to assist Cultivate Farms in its continued mission, but you have a very unique challenge right now in front of you.
We do. So we did convert to becoming a nonprofit organization earlier this year, and Lynn's actually the president of our board.
Oh.
She very humbly admits that
Terrific.
detail.
How could I not be?
Oh, good for
But,
you. That's great.
You know, so when we came to the town of Bolton, before opening our doors or buying a property, we asked the town planner, the building inspector, zoning officer, a selectman. All of them are plans to open a sober house and a farm-based treatment center. And they all said, please come to Bolton. Well, the neighbors didn't like that. The neighbors formed a coalition against us, brought us to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and violated state and federal law. And violated Fair Housing Act. They violated Americans with Disabilities Act, and they shut down our sober house. They said in the town of Bolton, they cited a bylaw written for congregate living of 55 and over, and said, "Oh, this applies. You can't be here."
Even though none of our sober living clients were ever of that age group.
So now, based on this, you're only able to do outpatient therapy?
Yeah,
Is
so
that
now we're
correct?
just doing we're fighting this, right? So we've attempted to work with the state attorney general's office, and she doesn't want to pick up the case. She referred us to the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, MCAD.
I have been to dozens and dozens of sober homes and halfway houses and treatment centers that are located in residential areas of Massachusetts.
Where else would you put a home?
Exactly.
It's a home.
Yeah. Exactly.
Clearly, this is running afoul of what all of those acts that you mentioned in the law. So, where do you go from here?
So we've contacted our state senator, and she says, Jen Flanagan's office says they can't help. We've contacted our state representative's office, Representative Benson. They said we can't help. So we're filing in Superior Court with the federal government. This is a federal violation of federal law, right? But this is important to keep in mind. The people here, this is it. We don't have some big company backing us. None of us come from wealth. We don't have money to throw at this, right? But we're not going to stop fighting.
Right.
That's
how important it is to us.
Because if they can say if Bolton can say, oh, we don't want a sober house here, we don't want people with disabilities in our town, who else gets to say that?
Yeah.
What
other
town
towns
does
get
it?
to say that?
So we have a governor spouting off about an opioid epidemic. We need to do things. Here's something you can do. Stand up to a bully town and say, you can't bully Massachusetts residents who need help.
Wow. That's so sad. That is, wow.
It really is. And so I'd like you to give out your contact information. First of all, I want to encourage anybody watching today to call Cultivate Farms up in Bolton, Massachusetts. Speak with Andrew or Deb and go up and take a tour. I can tell you personally, as someone who went there, it is an absolutely fantastic site. You get to see the animals, you get to meet the clinicians. There's nothing like boots on the ground, right? You've said that a couple of times, to get that feeling. You really have to get the feeling. So how can somebody contact you, Andrew?
Yeah, so Cultivate Farms, with an S at the end, cultivatefarms.org. Also, our phone number is 978-440-0763. We're also on Facebook at Cultivate Farms.
Okay, that's great. And the other issue that you're facing is funding.
Absolutely.
Because you're working pretty much on a sliding scale based on what people can afford, which is something almost unheard of. And another great reason to support your organization. So you would take donations
We would
from
very
individuals,
much encourage a donation.
corporate sponsorship.
Please. So we are, again, this is us. We need corporate backing. We need businesses to say, yeah, we don't want bullies here, and we're going to stand up with you. We need businesses to have the gumption and courage to say, yeah, we want a safer state. We want a healthier state, and we want to fight this opioid epidemic. And we do it by sending this very clear message to the town of Bolton and to any other bully town out there that says that they're better than this. So we need these partners to step up and say, yes, let's fight together. So individual donations are acceptable through our website, again, cultivatefarms.org. But contact us. Give us a call. Contact us through the website. There's so many ways we can work together to fight stigma and to fight people bullying the disabled.
And Jim, just to build it, again, even with all that, the animals are part of the treatment, and the animals, most of them are rescue animals, but those animals, there's an additional expense.
Oh, yeah.
Compared to regular treatment, it's not just the clinician and myself,
office,
it's
right.
the animals.
Yeah.
So there's vet care, there's feed.
Which
oh my
is
gosh, those
huge.
things that
Feed
horses
vet
know how to
care.
eat, whatever.
Yeah.
So there
What can
is an
they eat?
additional care.
Yeah.
That's why we decided to go nonprofit and try to raise that the animal or the care of the animals is an extra expense that's not usually associated with treatment for mental health issues. So.
But can I also say that I attended one of the Town of Bolton meetings with Deb and Andrew, and when they said they didn't want a sober house in the town, I personally was insulted because my son was a resident of Bolton, in my opinion. And, you know, when I talked about the great things that had happened, and, you know, they knew, I believe they knew that Jeff had passed. They were very sorry for my loss, but they still didn't want it.
What
in their town.
what they're afraid of? What
Well-
reason did they give? I mean, what?
Well, I would love to know, because we
Yeah.
invited this neighborhood to tour, to talk to us, no less than 10 formal invitations.
And I personally
Zero
invited them.
accepted.
Yeah, and lame excuses, in my opinion, but it's only my opinion, and I'm biased. I'm going to say that right now because it's my kid we're talking about here. Where they used to sit outside to smoke cigarettes. All right, let's face it, most people in recovery smoke cigarettes, at
Nearly
least in
all
the
of them.
beginning, okay? So they were clearly on our property,
On
clearly.
private property.
Yeah.
And, you know, this thing about secondhand smoke and the bus stop, forget it. The parking, the only time there was a tremendous amount of parking was the day we had Jeff's service, and they were saying how many cars are in and off of the property. You know what? They were just looking for
Absolutely.
excuses.
Absolutely.
And it makes me sad.
I think
very
our guests would
sad.
agree with me that this example of the town of Bolton is really just an example. This is emblematic
Oh,
of
yes.
That's right,
stigma
yes.
in,
That's
in
right.
all of our
Yes.
towns. None of us can claim immunity. In fact, Lynn was very candid early to say that earlier on when we were talking before the show that you actually can remember a time when you had this type of
Absolutely,
stigma.
yeah.
So, you know, this is something that you know, Jeff's legacy can really be put to use here, and people can really support this effort, because if it happens in Bolton, and Andrew, I love the fact that you brought that out. It can happen in Franklin, it can happen in Rentham, it can happen anywhere, and we cannot be looking to stop treatment when we're up against our nation's #1 health
Correct.
epidemic.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be farm-based therapy. We're talking sober houses or all-inclusive homes.
And it's
houses.
not a problem for Fall River or for Brockton
Right.
or for Lowell
Or even
for
Hudson, the
Worcester.
town, one town over from us has several supported living,
right.
and they mentioned it during the meetings.
Right.
And it's fine for Hudson,
Right.
but not here
It's
in
fine
Bolton.
for those other cities. Those are bad cities, which is ridiculous and ludicrous.
Sure.
It's in every single town. It's in our 20% of every single American battles mental illness. That's every town.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely
Right.
correct.
Yep.
No,
And
and
it-
it says not in our backyard is what Bolton's saying, but the problem is in their backyard.
That's right. Well
Sure
said.
is. Sure
Well
is. It's
said.
in all of our backyards.
Yep.
You know, the Safe Coalition, a big part of our mission is getting rid of stigma and allowing and giving voice to those that are impacted. And together, we can all learn together about this issue that is all amongst us every single day. We can't ignore it any more than we can ignore diabetes or cancer. I just want to thank you, Joe and Lynn Winkus, for coming forward. I'm so proud to have you as friends, and I know Jeff's legacy will make an indelible mark. It already has on me, and will make an indelible mark on Cultivate Farms. And I want to thank both of you for coming in as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to remind our listeners that the Safe Coalition is here to help. We have a resource line, which is 508-488-8105. You may call that line at any time to receive resources, help for families, or options for treatment if you or a loved one are suffering with substance use disorder. So for our guests, Joe and Lynn Winkus and Cultivate Farms and Dr. Ian Bergen, I'm Jim Derrick saying thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.